So Bernie Sanders, with his 25% base, seems to be the guy who's leading Democrats over a cliff. For every crazy thing that he says, there are a bunch of Democrats who will mirror it. It really is an astonishing thing. And it's reminiscent of 2016, when President Trump would say something that was pretty extreme, and other Republicans would rush to follow suit, or they would rush to pretend that he was right about it. So, for example, on trade, President Trump would come out against the Trans-Pacific Partnership. He'd talk about how trade deals were really bad, and suddenly all the Republicans would rush to surround him. You hear the patter of their little feet. Trump would walk over here, he'd stomp over there, and then you hear, and there are all the Republicans following him. Well, it's the same thing right now with Bernie Sanders. Bernie says something loony, and all the Democrats rush to follow him. So last night's example of Bernie saying something incredibly, incredibly loony is he was talking about his proposal to let people in prison vote. Now, this proposal is asinine in the extreme. It's asinine because if you're in prison, you have not paid your debt to society yet. There's an argument to be made that when you get out of prison, that you should be able to vote because now you have paid your debt to society. And if we don't want people voting when they get out of prison or participating in normal life when they get out of prison, maybe they shouldn't be out of prison. If you're afraid they're dangerous or that they have not paid their debt to society, then perhaps we should keep them there. But if you believe that somebody went to jail for shoplifting or somebody went to jail for securities fraud and now they've served 10 years, 15 years for securities fraud and they get out and they should never be allowed to vote again, right? If you're Dinesh D'Souza and you went to jail for some sort of campaign finance violation, a federal violation, can you vote or not? It seems like there's an argument to be made. I'm not super warm on the argument, but at least there's a logical argument to be made that once you have paid your debt to society and you get out, now you get to vote. Bernie Sanders is going even further. He wants people who are in prison to vote. Number one, they should not vote because they are wards of the state. If you're a ward of the state, you should not be able to vote. That is because you have an inherent interest in maximizing the power of the state and the benefits of the state and legislators who will give you what you want. Man, let's put it this way. Using the Kantian imperative, if we took this rule and extended it outright to the rest of society, if every person if only prisoners voted, let's say that only prisoners voted in the United States, do you think that the world would be better or worse? What do you think they would do with the criminal law? What do you think they would do with social benefits? Do you think the United States would be a better place or a worse place? So we take the worst people in our society, people so bad, we remove them from our society and put them behind bars, and then we give them the right to vote. This is Bernie Sanders' proposal, and he has asked a logical question by Ann Carlstein, who is a student at Harvard University, who asks him, how about like the Boston bomber? You want him voting too? And Bernie, being Bernie, cannot help himself.
You have said that you believe that people with felony records should be allowed to vote while in prison. Does this mean that you would support enfranchising people like the Boston Marathon bomber, a convicted terrorist and murderer?
If somebody commits a serious crime, sexual assault, murder, they're going to be punished. They may be in jail for 10 years, 20 years, 50 years, their whole lives. That's what happens when you commit a serious crime. But I think the right to vote is inherent to our democracy. Yes, even for terrible people.
Okay, so that's an insane answer. So we remove your right to freedom, remove your right to engage in commerce, but the right to vote is so sacrosanct that people who are evil, vicious murderers should be able to vote, who are in prison right now. And let me remind you, he is talking about some of the worst people on planet Earth. I just have to recall here what actually happened at the Boston Marathon bombing. At the Boston Marathon bombing, the bomber, it was two brothers, the bomber who actually planted the bomb at the Boston Marathon bombing took a backpack filled with a bomb, and he placed it about 2 feet away from an 8-year-old boy. He placed it 2 feet away from an 8-year-old boy, killed the boy on the spot. The boy bled out in front of his parents, blew the leg off his sister. Bernie Sanders thinks that person should have a say in the future of the United States, because that's what a vote is. It's a say in the future of the United States. Bernie Sanders believes, how vicious do you have to be to believe that these people should have a say in the future of the United States? How much must you think? It's so self-contradictory in a variety of ways. One, you must think that America is a pretty horrible place, that people who are the worst among us should have a say in what happens to the future of the country, that somehow they've been oppressed or something. I mean, what exactly is the justification here? And secondly, how vicious as a person must you be to ignore the evil that somebody commits in order to say that that person should be able to vote on what happens to the family of the person whose kid they murdered? That's what a vote is, after all. So they get to decide policy by which the person whose child they murder lives. It's insane. The father of that young boy, Martin Richard, talked about his son in the middle of the trial He described what happened. That was not the only person who was killed in the Boston Marathon bombing. Two other people, 29-year-old Crystal Campbell and 23-year-old Lindsay Liu, were also killed. 260 people were injured in the attack, people who lost legs, people who lost arms, people who were hit in the head. The father addressed the court back in 2015, describing what happened. They ducked into a Ben & Jerry's for ice cream and then found a spot to watch the runners near the finish line. There's a photograph showing the Richard family as they watched the race. Martin had climbed on the metal crowd barrier to get a better look. His family didn't know that just then, seen in the same photograph an arm's length away, was the bomber allegedly dropping a backpack with the bomb inside. It went off a few minutes later. Their daughter Jane lost her leg. Martin was killed outright. He said, I saw a little boy who had his body severely damaged by an explosion. I just knew from what I saw that there was no chance. He was 8 years old. Bernie Sanders? Yeah, why not? He should vote. Just because he's a bad guy doesn't mean that he shouldn't vote. It's truly incredible.